All right, YouTube. I just stumbled around on the internet and found some very strange information about a certain sinkhole in Louisiana, the Bayou Corne Sinkhole. It's near Bayou Corne, apparently. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, by the way. I know how to say Bayou, but corn might be Corne or Corny or something like that. Apparently, there's a 25-acre sinkhole in Louisiana, uh, right near, oddly enough, a Dow chemical plant that has now swallowed an entire lake. And I actually watched a video. There'll be several links in the description to a blog, to several news articles, and then the other video. There's a video of a chunk of trees in this swampy location simply giving way and getting sucked under the water into this muddy mess around the sinkhole. It's continuing to grow, and apparently over the last 48 hours, the conditions there have worsened to the point at which they issued a Code 3 in Louisiana as a result of the sinkhole, which means basically they're due to the instability of the area. People aren't really supposed to get anywhere near it. A lot of people have already been evacuated, hundreds of people within the perimeter of this area. Of course, Louisiana has a gigantic area of salt directly underneath the state. Most of the area is underlain by this gigantic deposit of salt. Well, apparently, what seems to have happened is that this area was mined for that salt. Of course, it's a commodity. At one point, it was more valuable than gold. This salt was mined. What they would do is inject the ground, inject the salt, I guess drill it out, inject fresh water into it. It would dissolve the salt and then get pumped back up and refined and sold. This area, however, for whatever reason, is now growing more unstable. Maybe they overmined it. Apparently, either a cavern gave way, sucking all this water down, which you would think would then slowly dissolve and further destabilize the area. Or something seismic happened and there's a crack in it or a fissure of some sort. I don't think they're exactly sure. Apparently it collapsed sideways rather than straight down, which amazed them. But it's also releasing, apparently there is an oil deposit somewhere under this salt within this vicinity, because it's now giving off methane and other toxic gases. And there was one article where they said they were worried that the release of this highly flammable mixture of gas could cause an explosion or a raging inferno in this general area. There's one article saying that that they're expecting it simply to slowly expand, which means the sinkhole will keep growing at whatever rate it does. There's a blog dedicated solely to this sinkhole now that's also in the description, where apparently there are now seismic tremors in this area that have been happening almost continuously for 48 hours. They happened before as well, when the sinkhole first emerged, when the first crater started appearing. Apparently there was a significant seismic event, and now there's another potentially significant seismic event as well, which might herald this sinkhole growing larger, perhaps collapsing completely and leaving a gigantic crater. In the worst case scenario, I'm not sure, I'm not a geologist, obviously, but it would seem to me if this salt deposit was heavily mined and it's crisscrossed with all sorts of tunnels and caverns anyway, and the ground's been drilled into and destabilized, then any sort of seismic event could cause the whole thing to essentially collapse. This is a very swampy, wet area. All of these, you could have dozens of sinkholes lining the state potentially, draining bodies of water directly into the salt, destabilizing it further. What I'm not sure about, and I can't seem to find a source for this, is whether they think a seismic event caused a collapse, or whether the collapsing of this salt structure and the creation of these sinkholes is causing the seismic events. I don't know because I'm not studious enough in that general area of study to know exactly what's happening. But whatever the case may be, this is a gigantic sinkhole. 25 acres is pretty large. There's 2.5 acres of land here, so imagine this relatively large plot times 10. That's a considerable, that's like most of my neighborhood being suddenly submerged. But really watch the video of this chunk of trees getting sucked directly into the ground. That is astounding to watch that. Literally, the trees just slowly start to sink into the water and then disappear completely. And then all of a sudden it's calm again, like nothing had happened. The fact that things are continuing to sink into there means that there's more room, common sense would dictate, for them to sink into. Apparently, they're worried that this whole area is completely unstable now and that there's a town fairly close by. It's near a major highway as well. Apparently, they're worried about both of them and their safety and probably considering evacuating everyone else if this sinkhole destabilizes further. So that's just a little story that I stumbled upon on the internet. A very, very weird story to say the least. You think of all sorts of scenarios in which this could become disastrous, at least for this town, and for that major highway that just happens to be very, very close to this sinkhole. But it's kind of funny. Apparently, this lake that has now been destroyed, essentially, is termed Lake Fubar now because it no longer exists. Literally, you look at the before and after, it's sort of like there's a lake there, not a huge lake, but a fairly substantial one with a lot of swampy areas around it because it's Louisiana. It's all a giant swamp anyway. And then you look at it now, it's just a giant muddy crater. There's nothing left of it. These trees, there are trees hanging sideways over this enormous chunk of land. Nothing's growing there or anything, and it's slowly sliding in on itself. Uh, and to tell the truth, if these tremors continue, and if we assume that the tremors give way to more sinkhole activity, then it could probably start expanding just about any time. But go to the blog. They've got probably more knowledge than I have on this sort of subject. And watch the video. It's truly amazing to watch these trees just suddenly disappear off the face of the earth. You can almost imagine them screaming for help as they slowly drown and end up deposited underground in a salt cave that's probably half flooded with water. So that's about all. Just an interesting story.